A judge ordered the castration of a young boy, of your son,
Yes.
and tried to turn him physically, mutilate his body, and turn him physically into a girl.
Mommy says I'm a girl. If Donald Trump can't win, you can't win. This is the most
Correct.
awesome power that a government can have.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Mansplainers. I'm here with my co-host, Dr. Stephen Baskerville, and our guest today is Jeff Younger. Thanks for being with us, Jeff.
It's great to be here. Thanks for asking me on.
Thank you, Jeff. Yes, it is great to have you here. This is a special show and a special time, and this is one of the most horrendous cases that I've ever heard of, and I think that almost anyone has ever heard of. And I've heard about quite a few. I've written about quite a few of them.
Yes.
But this is truly shocking. Anyone who fails to be shocked by this case is just not quite fully human. I'd also add, though, before we start, that I've also found I've been listening to your material, reading your material, and listening to videos that you've done, and I've also just found that you have a very well researched material. Very your material is just some of the best out there as far as the general abuses of family court judges, even aside from what happened to you personally and your son. And so I urge people to listen to you. Before we go, I want you. Well, we'll certainly put your contact
Okay.
where you can be reached, and we'll mention it before the show is over. But your case came to my attention, and I think it's come to many other people's attention, just by the jaw-dropping horror of what was perpetrated. We've all heard horrible cases. I wrote a book about family courts injustices, and readers said things like, I had to put this book down because the cases were too awful. The things I was reading were just too shocking and disturbing, and I couldn't read anymore. And yet, even I am shocked by what happened to you. A judge ordered the castration of a young boy, of your son,
Yes.
and tried to turn him physically, mutilate his body, and turn him physically into a girl.
Yes.
Please, however you want to go with that.
Well, the way this all began, um, I think I think we should probably just start with human motivations. My lawyers have had three teams of lawyers. I don't use lawyers anymore. Once you've been in court for 12 years, three times a month, you've got more experience than the attorneys you're hiring. But when I had attorneys and my appellate attorneys, I've had three teams. A lot of people will ask me, like, what caused your wife to want to transition your son to a girl? So first of all, your viewers can go to YouTube, search for "Mommy Says I'm a Girl." It's the first iPhone video I ever took. And it went worldwide because I'm an Orthodox Christian, and Orthodox community couldn't believe it. They understand Texas as a Bible Belt state, so they couldn't believe what was happening to my son. And it's basically my son just past his third birthday saying that his mother says he's a girl, and he basically believes her. Um, she basically told the court under oath that he asked for a girl's toy in a McDonald's Happy Meal. And then a few days later, he saw a silver purse with a unicorn on it at Target and wanted the purse. And that's when she thought he might be a girl. That's her official sworn testimony. My first team of lawyers, which were in the district courts, said, well, actually, what she's doing is she's found a way to use the liberal court system in Dallas County to take total control of the child. And this was a mechanism for her to do that. And then my appellate attorneys, who are much more experienced in some of the worst child abuse cases in Texas, said that she picked the child that looked most like me and then sought to destroy his life. So those are the three human motivations, because people always want to know that first. Here's what happened in the courts. The court in Texas, district courts, always appoint what's called a custody evaluator here. They're psychologists, usually PhD level psychologists. They make a big deal about that. But of course, if you know anything about the crisis of replication in psychology, you know that this is not a meaningful distinction. And his name, the first custody evaluator's name was Blake Mitchell. He practices out of Frisco, Texas. And one of the things you'll find about me, guys, is I name people's names. And the reason is truth is an absolute defense against defamation. I've never been sued. I never will be, because I can prove all this. So Blake Mitchell was told what she was doing to my son. And I showed him that video that's on YouTube. Mommy says I'm a girl. He lied in his report to the court and said that my ex-wife was not transitioning my son to a girl, and said that I had made a false accusation against her, and on that basis recommended that I get less than standard possession time with my sons. And that's exactly what the court did. That's under Judge Kim Cooks in the 255th District Court in Dallas County. She began to really ramp up the transitioning of my son after that. And to the point where, and I didn't know this for a year, I would bring my son to school in boys' clothes, and the teacher and the principal would give him dresses and make him use the girls' restroom at school. And they did that behind my back. The principal's name is Miss Mickelson, and she was at Pinkerton Elementary School in Capel, Texas. Again, I name people's names. She did this behind my back. That middle school has since been shut down because of the controversy, and Miss Mickelson retired. I think she is working, though, in the school system still. They began to socially transition him and present him to the world as a girl. However, here, and this is the most important thing to know about my case, my son never presented as a girl to me or to any of my family or to any of his friends that he knows with me. So my son would only present as a girl with his mother. And in fact, he presented as a boy with his mother too, because when I would go pick him up from his mother's house, he would come out in boys' clothes and respond to the name James. So he was definitely comfortable being a boy. Nevertheless, the courts throughout this whole process privileged the abnormal gender expression that his mother had foisted on him. Eventually, she begins to ramp this transitioning up, but unfortunately for her, I just decided to dispense with all the psychological theories. And what I did was I said, look, I'm just going to show my son how cool it is to be a man. So we would, you know, they heard all these tall tales about me when I was a boy. I grew up up at a small farm and ranch in the panhandle of Texas when I was a boy. And we were pretty poor. I had to hunt to bring food home. I was expected to bring home 2 dinners a week by hunting. So I used to hunt rabbits with an Apache throwing stick, and they heard all these stories from my mom. So they wanted this. So we started going hunting for rabbits. Where I live, there's no season for rabbits. We go hunt for rabbits, learned how to track animals. I'm a boxer, so I'd take him to the boxing gym with me. One of my son's names are James and Jude was born with a little bit of cerebral palsy. When his hand would cross the center line, he would lose control, a little neurological issue. So in boxing, all punches cross the center line. So he got 50,000 repetitions of crossing the center line with his hands, and it basically cured him of those problems. Oh. But let me just tell you some of the things in the boxing gym. And my ex-wife would come to the boxing gym and she hated my son's being there because it's really one of the last places where there's masculine culture. So my son Jude could not jump rope very well. So, it took him a month just to be able to jump once. And it took him another month just to jump twice. And when he jumped twice, the entire boxing gym stopped. These semi-pro boxers all come over to him and said, hey, you jumped twice. That means you're jumping rope. We all thought you were a quitter, but now we know you're one of us. So welcome to the club. And I don't think my boys will ever forget things like that. Okay. Like those lessons that they learned with men. I don't think my ex-wife can train that out of them. I wanted I knew that James had my values in this one particular moment when I wanted them to see a real boxing match where men try to hurt each other and win. So the they set up, I'm 61, I'm too old to be doing this stuff. So they had to get special permission. They set up an exhibition match. Unfortunately for me, I get this 25-year-old, 6'5" super heavyweight guy. And, he lands a really hard liver shot on me in the first round. And I don't know if you've ever been liver shotted, but you curl up in the fetal position. You can't uncurl. So I'm sitting there, and then James yells out, "Hey, Dad, it hurts just as bad on the ground as it does standing up. Might as well stand up." And I said, "Wow, you have my value." So I started laughing. My opponent started laughing. The referee laughed. And I was able to get through 3 rounds with this monstrous guy. But I was like, okay, my boys have my values, So I don't think she can ever get rid of that. That's my hope, at least. So she began to see that he was rejecting a female identity very strongly. So she takes me to another trial in 2019. And this became like a media frenzy trial. Worldwide media was there. And at that trial, they brought in the top transgender experts on their side, and I brought in the top transgender experts on my side. They had Johanna Olsen Kennedy, who ran the largest gender clinic in America at LA Children's Hospital. I shut that clinic down. We could talk about that later. Then I brought in Dr. Levine, who started the first transgender clinic in the world. He's from Johns Hopkins. They ran their transgender clinic in the early 70s for 4 years, but their data showed that they were harming patients. So they shut it down. He destroyed all of their witnesses, but they didn't put Johanna Olsen Kennedy on the stand, because in deposition, I asked her one question. And the opposing counsel dropped her pen, fled the room, and then I never heard of Olsen Kennedy being on the stand again. I just asked Olsen Kennedy, what is your medical justification for amputating healthy body parts from children? And she answered, if they cause psychological distress, they're not healthy and we can remove them. And they would not put her in front of a Texas jury. And so I won my 2019 trial. I got 50-50 custody, no child support, but most importantly, I got a check on all medical procedures. Well, the judges in Dallas County did not like that at all. Go ahead.
This is amazing that this would even be dignified like this in an American courtroom that supposedly administers justice, that they would seriously have people on there posing as experts with degrees from, I don't know, accredited universities.
Yeah.
Actually maintaining that, there's a reasonable justification for mutilating a healthy child, and trying to change something which everyone knows can't be changed, which is his biological sex.
Yeah.
And
the courts,
this is just,
the courts asserted the power to make
a
decision. The courts have no power to make such a decision, but they asserted such a power.
Well, this is exactly right. This is the idea that a government official or court can legislate or can adjudicate a fact. It's like the old myth about King Canute. He took the flatterers down to the sea, and he said that if I tell the waves to stop, will the waves stop? And they said, of course the waves will stop. So he ordered the waves to stop. And of course, the waves did not stop, because you can't. There's some, the idea that a government can legislate. There was a story a few years ago about Alabama legislature passing a law saying that pi equals 3 or something. I mean, this is just the abuse of power is just staggering in this. Sorry, go ahead.
No, it's really, if you get down to the fundamentals of what we're facing, is what we have given to the judiciary is the very ability to determine what words mean. And this is the most awesome power that a government can have, because it completely determines how you'll be treated under the law. And this construction of meaning, which is what they call it, when they say we construe from the law, it's a construction process. These construction methods that they use are not the kinds of methods that you and I use in our everyday life. So
they're not plain English.
They're not plain English. And, legal definitions are like mathematical definitions. They're stipulative. They're not based on characteristics of the things being defined. They don't follow a genus and differentia kind of approach to doing definitions. When legal definitions are made, that's just what they are, just like in mathematics. So in the law, because they can determine what things mean, this is the most awesome power that a government can have, because it completely determines how you'll be treated under the law. And this construction of meaning, which is what they call it, when they say we construe from the law, it's a construction process. These construction methods that they use are not the kinds of methods that you and I use in our everyday life. So
they're not plain English.
They're not plain English. And, legal definitions are like mathematical definitions. They're stipulative. They're not based on characteristics of the things being defined. They don't follow a genus and differentia kind of approach to doing definitions. When legal definitions are made, that's just what they are, just like in mathematics. So in the law, because they can determine what things mean, and they can determine the relative hierarchy of values in each case, there's really no limit on what judges can do to you. You think that you have rights, but remember, your rights are only determined by the meanings of words that judges assign to them.
Absolutely. This goes back to Alice in Wonderland 200 years ago. Jonathan Swift satirized this. Who was it? Who's the character who said, when I use a word, it means exactly what I say it means, of course,
yes.
which means, of course, it can be changed. Of course, it can mean this different thing in the next sentence. I noticed the U.S. Congress does this now. They preface legislation by saying, for the purpose of this legislation, these words mean this.
Yes. Yes. And so consequently, I've made the argument, I've made it in court, and in a few cases, judges have accepted it. Appellate courts have accepted it in one case. I've made the claim that the true law is the customs of the people, that it isn't a statutory law, And the example that I've used is this idea that, I don't know, what's a good example? So suppose that you have an old woman who's been accused of speeding, and she's in traffic court, and they say, well, she was going 31 in a 31 miles an hour, 1 mile over the speed limit. No jury in America would convict her for that, because we know that the actual customs of our people is it's basically plus or minus 5 miles an hour, right? And that's because, inaccuracy of measurement equipment, the inaccuracy of the speedometer, the inaccuracy of humans observing it, it's plus or minus 5 miles an hour. On the highway, it's really plus or minus 10 miles an hour. Like, no one would ever convict someone for going 1 mile over the speed limit. You would just be like, that's ridiculous. Go home and be good, right? The customs of the people are what really matter. And what judges have found out, liberal judges especially, have found out, and by liberal, I don't necessarily mean leftist. Conservatives are kind of classical liberals, also do this.
They are.
So what they have discovered is that they can take these normal meanings from the customs of the people and reinterpret the laws in a different way to modify human custom by changing all the incentives in the laws. And they've been doing this for over a century to us, where they create interpretations of laws that don't match up at all with what was there. Like, the great example of this would be, the U.S. Supreme Court decision, which found that transgender people, which are just cross-dressers, have legal protections under the equal opportunity laws. Now, these were laws passed in the mid-'60s when there was no concept of transgender, but the Supreme Court construed, again, construe means constructed, from that definition, the idea that sex in that law meant gender. which was absolutely not in the customs of the people in the 1960s. That is absolutely not what they meant.
Very true. That, I mean, that whole word gender is, of course, is a terrible linguistic innovation.
Yes.
Can I just interject here that what you've just expressed, this idea of the customs, the true laws and the customs of the people, this is the basis of the entire English common law.
Yes.
This goes back before Magna Carta to
Yes.
the soil of Anglo-Saxon England. All
Yes.
the great jurists said something very similar. John
Yes.
Fortescue, William Blackstone, Sir Edward Coke. I mean, A.V. Dicey. I mean, you name one of the famous jurists of Anglo-American jurisprudence, and they would all concur with that. That's precisely what it is. And if you undermine that, you've undermined the entire English common law, which means you've undermined the U.S. Constitution, the basis of all legislation, all justice. You've undermined Magna Carta. You've undermined all the great documents of English constitutional history. I mean, it's nihilism. You've just thrown out all of the legal standards of legal justice, and replaced it with whatever's in the judge's craw that morning.
Yeah, and that's when fathers ask me what it's like in family court, that's what I tell them. One of the things I learned a lot of things from reading anti-Enlightenment literature. One of them is Nietzsche. And what I got out of reading him mostly, if I had to sum it down to one thing, it would be this. He never asked why people do things. He always asked what kind of person would want to do those things. That's a very, very different kind of question. So you ask yourself, what kind of person would want to be a family court judge? What kind of person would want to assume that power over parents? And you realize that it's a certain kind of moralist attitude, a person who wants to be in a position to tell other people how to raise their children, but make those people do all the work and pay for it. It's almost like they want to be a proxy grandparent. And I've actually had judges say that. They judge like as though they're grandparents for these kids.
That's a good point. Yeah. The other thing too is that I think you were talking about human motivation here. The other motivation, I go back to I had my adolescence in the 1970s when radical feminism was making its really emerging, on the stage in a big way. And I remember very well feminists denying that they wanted to castrate men. This was the argument. Everybody took it. Oh, it's a cheap shot. Feminists they hate men. They want to castrate them all.
Right.
Well, look where we are. A half century later, within the span of my lifetime, that's exactly what they're doing. So I think the role of fanatical, really not just radical, but fanatical ideology, and what that does to people's minds and motivations and sense of righteousness and so forth is inhuman.
The case of feminism to me is really fascinating, and I actually find it humorously ironic. First of all, I've had to deal with a lot of radical feminists. I've had to deal actually with like radical feminists from the Women's Liberation Front who actually advocated mass murder of men. Okay. Because these women are totally against the transgender agenda. There's a big split in radical feminism between some who are against transgender and some who are for it. And the ones who are against the transgender stuff turn out to be pretty good and reliable political allies when you're trying to get laws passed. So I've had many occasions to work with them. And what's funny, and I point this out to them, and they sheepishly will admit, there's something to what I'm saying. But what I pointed out was, it was the feminist questioning of social norms, which directly led to the transgender movement. It is
of course.
And what I point out, they say, well, we didn't have to go this far. And I said, well, whoa. That's not how human theorizing, human ideologies, and human political movements work. They work out to the logical ends, the logical conclusions of their premises over time. That's how it works. And I said, so here's the deal. Like, you questioned these social norms. You threw them out. In fact, you transgressed them to the point where, and created laws even, where we can't even challenge your transgression. of these social norms. Why are you surprised now that you have achieved a privileged place in our society at law? That men now want to enter into that sanctum of privilege, and they can do that by being transgender. And suddenly they get all the privileges that you get. And suddenly you all told us you were seeking equality, but now you say that men are taking away your sex-based rights. Wait a minute. I thought it wasn't sex-based rights. I thought it was equal rights for everybody. You were always seeking a female supremacist legal system. That was your goal from the very beginning. Second wave feminism was all about that. Third wave feminism, which is radical feminism, was simply the application of legal theories to do it, right? Yeah. So I was like, look, this is on you. And they won't admit that, but you can tell when you see their faces that they know I'm right about that.
Oh, of course you are. And Janice Fiamingo has written at least one piece on that, and maybe a couple. So it's yeah. Well, I'm glad to know. I give you kudos for, on the one hand, pointing this out to these feminists, but on the other hand, also being able to work with them in a practical way to pass legislation, because I get very short.
Some of them are very nice people. Yeah, I'll tell you funny. I won't mention her name. She would probably get mad, but you know, I went out to do some sign holding work at Southern Methodist University with a bunch of them, and you know, and believe it or not, I picked up the check for their lunch, and nobody complained. And we had an interesting discussion. You know, I said, hey, here's some areas where I agree with you. Like, I don't think that a boy should be in women's sports, but do you agree with me that women shouldn't be in boys' sports? Because in Texas, that's legal. And she said, well, I don't understand. Women don't have an advantage. Why do you care? I said, well, here's an example where you might care. I don't want my sons in a boxing ring or on a wrestling mat with a woman because I don't want to train him to hit women. And she was just blown away by that. Never thought about that. Yeah. I said, why do you think that we've had sex segregated sports for almost all of human history? And there are very rare exceptions to it. Like every culture does this. And it's because you don't want to train men to hit women. You don't want to train them. And she's like, wow, I never thought about that. So then she kind of opened up to me, and she was standing there. I was giving her a sign, and I just told her the truth. I said, you know, you're a very beautiful woman. If you would wear a dress and get a nice haircut, you would be the most beautiful woman on this campus. And she really didn't know what to do with that, because she knew I was right. But there was something about being beautiful that she didn't want to be beautiful. And I said, this is my male gaze. This is the positive aspect of the male gaze, that I appreciate your good qualities, your manner and your appearance and the way you treat people. I admire that in you, even though we disagree. And that's really how I've been able to work with them. Many of them do have admirable. People are not all like terrible. Look, Andrea Dworkin, yeah, okay. Andrea Dworkin should be put into a hole. Okay, I get it. But most of these people just have parts of them that are really great people, and you can work with people when you can find that goodness, the good motivation, and and when you kind of understand their struggles. Like, I know a lot of these women had struggled through family courts as well, and had lost their children, and some of them had lost their children over the transgender issue. So you can always work with people towards a common goal, as long as you can find like a little bit of humanness that you can relate to. That's one thing I learned from all this. I didn't know. I couldn't do that before.
Well, that's extremely charitable on your part, considering what you've been through. I think this speaks quite loudly about your own character, perhaps because of your Christian faith, that you're able to see the best in people who subscribe to an ideology that has inflicted this horrendous.
It's horrendous. It's been the destruction experience. Of the West. I mean, we're talking about nothing less than the total destruction of Western world.
Yeah. Could I go back to the question of on that point? In fact, could I go back to the courts for a moment? Because I heard you say something in a video the other day, which I think is extremely important. I can almost say that it's been the basis of my recent work in the last few years. And that is, you said that the injustices in the family court, the corruption, the horrifying corruptions in the family court and injustices are the template, was the word you used. They are the template for other injustices in the judiciary, and I would say in government as well, including the lawfare operations against Donald Trump,
Yeah.
and so forth. And I think that's extremely important point, because I think people need to understand that you cannot quarantine injustice. You cannot separate it. Martin Luther King said that an injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere.
Yeah.
And if they can inflict this on you, they can inflict it on anybody. If they can inflict it on men in family courts, they can inflict it on women in family courts, and they can inflict it on other people in criminal courts or civil courts or probate courts. Or Donald Trump and his followers in the federal courts. So this is very important. This idea that you may not care. The average person out there doesn't. Bradley and I have been talking about this a lot lately. We had a guest on why the men's movement doesn't get anywhere, why these injustices don't get any attention. But a lot of them, maybe some don't deserve to get more attention, but those. There is a sense in which some of those injustices, especially the horrendous court practices, are not going to be confined forever to men or fathers. They're going to spread. They're going to spread to women, to other people in other courts, and they're going to poison. They're already doing it, as you said. They're already poisoning the judiciary, and they're poisoning, I think, other branches of government as well. Could you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, let's use your Martin Luther King example, first of all, right? White people didn't care what happened in the Black community, and white people didn't care what happened to Black families in the 60s and 70s. It was just another community. That's their business. Well, the government had created specific programs that, Democrat Party intellectuals wrote books saying and predicting what would happen to the Black family if these programs went into place. And basically, you could get a giant paycheck if you didn't have a father in the home in the Black community. And are we surprised then that 20 years go by and there's no Black fathers in the homes? And whites didn't much care about that. They thought, well, that's just, that's them. And all kinds of narratives were spun up. That was the test case for how to roll it out to the white middle class.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. They tested it on this vulnerable community first, right?
Yes, very much.
So they knew exactly, again, people wrote entire books about this. They knew exactly what was going to happen with the passage of Title 4D. Title 4D was almost the exact same financial incentives that destroyed the Black family. They knew what was going to happen. They were creating this incentive for the states. Go ahead.
I was going to say, apropos of your observation about that, Frederick Douglass said something very similar more than before the American Civil War. He said, the white man's grave is marked out, the white man's liberty is marked out for the same grave as the Black man's.
That's right. That's exactly right.
Yes.
And so the family court became this place where they could actually test these sort of new legal theories, where they could test how far the courts would go and how far people would let them go. And if you look, for example, at Donald Trump's civil court case on the false rape accusations that were leveled against him, that was a family court trial. If you look at the techniques, if you look at the rules of evidence that were applied, if you looked at the evidentiary standard that was applied in that civil trial, it was a family court trial. And the exact template that's used in divorces was used there. A winner is picked in advance. How's the winner picked in advance?
Yeah.
Through temporary orders. Temporary orders set the stage for everything. So Donald Trump had his assets frozen. He couldn't pay his lawyers. He had to get a new legal team. All the stuff that plays out in family court was played against them, right? And let me tell you, if Donald Trump can't win, you can't win.
Good point. Yeah, there's an interesting point. When that happened, a number of these media legal scholars came on, like, what's the guy's name? Horowitz.
Yeah.
Yeah, and some of the others and they said they made the point. They said, I think they got it backwards. They said if this can happen to Donald Trump, it can happen to anybody, which is true.
Yes.
It's a valid legal principle, as you just said. But what they didn't say is because this is happening to Donald Trump because it's already happening
Correct.
to less powerful people in places like family court that nobody sees. So it wasn't like this is going to spread from Donald Trump to the rest of us. It started with the rest of us.
It did.
And this is Donald Trump was the culmination of this.
That's right. And in my opinion, it is how they captured Donald Trump. They got him into these fake criminal prosecutions. They got him in these fake civil trials. They froze all of his assets, and therefore he had to take money from large donors, and then the large donors controlled him. And the deal is, if he does what they want, they'll unfreeze his assets. I mean, this is how the courts are actually used in our system, right? Yeah. It's same in Texas. So family courts are used against political enemies here all the time. I know a guy who was the mayor of Mineral Wells, Texas. He discovered a multi-billion-dollar fraud scheme under USAID operating out of his own city, in his own county. He brought this to the attention of the Texas Rangers, and next thing you know, his ex-wife is represented by Coons Fuller, the most expensive law firm in the state of Texas. Their starting retainer is $175,000 just to start a case. These expensive attorneys are traveling long distances from Dallas, Texas to Mineral Wells. He loses his kids and he's imprisoned in family court. And next thing you know, there's no corruption case anymore because now he's not a credible witness. This is how family courts are being used. Family courts have become a place, and civil courts increasingly have become a place where political dissidents are suppressed, and where, remember, when the government wants to force you to do something, whenever the government uses force against you, it happens in a court. That is the purpose of the courts. It's the mechanism by which the government can use force against you. And so it's the ultimate trump card, if you pardon my expression. So it's being used in all the states for this purpose. Ken Paxton, you think it's an accident that his wife filed for divorce right when he ran for the Senate, here in Texas? And he won the Republican primary against John Cornyn, but it wasn't for trying in the family courts with Ken Paxton. And Ken Paxton, if anybody tried to protect my son, it was Ken Paxton. And they made him suffer for that.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
That's very interesting because John Cornyn has a reputation as being one of the worst government officials for fathers. I mean, one of the
he's absolutely the worst. Absolutely the worst. And he's hated by his own constituencies, right? How do these people keep getting elected? Well, the same way that guys like Thomas Massey get unelected, right? It's the same people. Who is the largest out-of-state donor in Texas? Well, it's the same person who's the largest donor to Trump. It's Miriam Adelson. The second largest donor is Paul Singer, and both of them are the founders of the transgender movement, and they're Republicans. Republican donors founded the transgender movement, not Democrats. So the Human Rights Campaign, the yellow equal sign, that was started by Paul Singer, a hedge fund billionaire who is the largest donor to the Republican Party. The scorecard, which requires you to hire transgender people, that was enforced by BlackRock on corporations, was created by the Human Rights Campaign. Okay, so all of this stuff is not what people think. The family courts are weaponized first and foremost to disempower the middle class in America, and we could talk about why that is. And then secondly, to attack political dissidents, and it's extremely effective in that regard. Most fathers that I talk to are unwilling to engage in political activity because they're afraid they'll go to jail. I try to tell them, there's a lot of things worse than going to jail, man. I mean, what's jail? It's 3 hots in a cot. You're eating a 1,900 calorie a day diet. You're going to get trim and in shape. You have plenty of time to write your books, near infinite leisure. Like, how bad can it really be in jail? You know what I'm saying? There are a lot worse things than going to jail. And having your sons be abused, creating a future where your son's children will be even abused even worse. There are a lot of things worse than that. But it's very effective. I cannot get fathers to engage in effective political action because they're terrified of the family courts.
Well, do you
Yeah,
mean
go on.
do
Go
you
on,
mean
Bradley.
simply okay? Do you simply mean that engaging in activism, I mean, whether it's written work or physical work outside of one's home, that in itself can lead to incarceration? Is that true?
Oh yeah, I got a friend of mine that just got out of jail for engaging in political activity against the sitting judge, and they manufactured a fake a failure to pay child support claims against them, and of course that can take years to go through the system. I've got another friend of mine who had a judge who just assumed jurisdiction over a case and issued 6 years worth of void orders. He finally won after like 10 years in an appellate court and won a huge money judgment, and all those orders were wiped out. The judge just 4 weeks ago assumed jurisdiction again and is doing the case again. Yeah, and the only reason they're doing that is because he's a massive political activist to change the judicial accountability laws in this state. So,
If enough fathers did that, though, if enough of them responded that way and got themselves a profile and came out, we might get to the point, and I don't know when this would be true, where the judges might be afraid. Judges don't like publicity. Judges don't like adverse publicity. They don't like, accusations. So there is the strategy, of course, the opposite strategy: engage in political activity, get as high a profile as you can, get into the media, scream bloody murder, and hope that maybe the judge will be intimidated by that. I don't know.
I think that worked for me. I think that approach worked for me. I definitely intimidated these judges, which is why after I won my 2019 case, the judges in Dallas County moved my case into the 301st District Court under Judge Mary Brown. I call her Judge Bloody Mary Brown. Bloody Mary Brown recognized that I had gotten the laws passed in this state outlawing these transgender procedures. I got an opinion from the Texas Attorney General saying it was already child abuse under existing law. And so here was my ex-wife actually engaging in child abuse under existing law. So what she did is she let my wife move to California to get me out of the state. And the judge did that right after California passed its transgender kidnapping bill. Are you guys familiar with that?
No.
Yeah, it was, I think it's SB 13. It was spearheaded by Senator Weiner in the California Senate, who's now actually running for the federal Senate. I've often said the only transgender surgery I would ever support is the amputation of the wiener from the California Senate. This guy is a horrible, horrible person. He passed laws in California which lowered the age of statutory rape for gay people, but kept the same higher age for heterosexual people, just to put that in perspective for you. So this guy passes this transgender kidnapping bill and spearheads it through. He's using a lot of big donors, ACLU and others. Asaf Orr was involved in it in California. And basically what this law says is that if a child who's transgender enters the borders of California, California will never repatriate that child to a state that doesn't affirm the child's chosen gender identity. So you cannot take your children to California. It is not safe. First Liberty and a lot of the conservative law firms issued travel advisories after this law was passed. So right after that law passed, my judge allowed my son to move to California. And within 2 hours, they were on a plane. Like, it was all planned. They were on a plane and they were in California. I went up to the Texas Supreme Court and argued that my son had to be repatriated because this was child abuse in Texas, and that it was inevitable that he would be abused in California because it's considered a medical right of the child in California. But the Texas Supreme Court ruled with the district judge and said my son was no likely to be castrated in California than in Texas, where we had made it illegal. Completely ridiculous opinion. And that's how they dealt with it. So now what you have is you have family court judges colluding across state lines in order to achieve outcomes. So what that tells you is that you're dealing with a national level of corruption. This is not like some individual thing that are isolated to bad judges or whatever. They're coordinating with each other in order to get rulings in cases in key jurisdictions to get the precedents and interpretations of the law that they want. My son was just a victim of that.
Yeah, in other words, it's a violation, of course, of federalism and the whole purpose of having courts and justice on the local level, which is another old principle of the common law, is that justice has to be accessible to the people where they live and in the localities. Could I just go back? Sorry, I cut out for a moment there. I think my signal was bad. But a point you made a moment ago about how difficult it is to get fathers engaged. I think this idea of the courts as the template for the other injustices by the judiciary and by the government is a very important point. On this show, Bradley and I have been very much at pains to discourage complaining, whining, self-pity by fathers, by men, and to concentrate on what is truly important. And I think that distinction is illustrated here, because I think there are certain things that are perceived as being unfair to men, but unfairness is part of life. The fact that women are treated, can commit domestic violence against men with impunity, and that men cannot do it against women. I mean, that's terribly unfair, but it's, I think it's something most men are able to deal with. Injustice is a different thing than unfairness. Injustice is the corruption of the state, corruption of the judiciary, corruption of the fonts of justice. And that's what threatens everybody. And I think that's what men, fathers, every citizen in a free country should be concerned about. So, it's not just a matter there's certain things that, they're unfair and it's too bad and I'm really sorry. But you got to kind of suck it in and deal with it. But if it's the corruption of the judiciary like this, again, it's something that if you close your eyes to it, to what happened to you, if people who close their eyes to what happened to you and your son, something this horrendous, then we, as the founding fathers might have said, we don't deserve to be a free people anymore. We don't deserve our freedom if we're going to throw it away that easily.
Yeah, and unfortunately, what I have discovered is that, how do I say this? I want to say this in a very nice way. It is very difficult for people who want traditional American notions of rights and freedom, who want a traditional understanding of the family as really the basis for the protection of those rights and freedoms. It's very difficult for them to look at the system that they've been taught to love and to understand it as corrupt. Like I've had a lot of people come up to me, very well-meaning, very nice people, come up to me and say, these judges can't do this, Jeff. This is unconstitutional, and you can stop this. And I'm like, you don't. You're not understanding what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that the courts are not constrained by the supreme law. The courts are not even constrained by statutory law. The courts can construe the meanings of the words in the law to whatever case they want. And in family court, they've been given free license to do that with almost no appellate oversight. So there's a lot of things in family court, like I don't think a lot of people think about, it's kind of abstract and abstruse, but you can't appeal temporary orders in family court. Well, in every other court, criminal and civil, you can appeal temporary orders, but you can't do that in family court. So that means that these temporary orders don't have a temporary character, because it took me 3.5 years to get to my first trial. If a court enters a temporary order that sets up a relationship between the parent and the child after 3.5 years, do you think an appellate court is going to change the circumstances of that child after 3.5 years? They're not. They're going to say
afterwards the damage has been done, by the way.
The damage has been done, yeah. And so one of the problems we have in family court is that we have a growing and maturing child. These are not like physical assets like in a civil case. So temporary orders protecting physical assets are one thing, but temporary orders do not have a temporary character in family court. And they've been made unappealable in all the states. In all the states, you cannot appeal temporary orders. So when the judge in the very first hearing, having no evidence at all, says, I'm issuing temporary orders, the father gets 27% time. He gets his every other weekend. The mother is given primary custody. That actually creates the winner of the case, because 3.5 years later, when you get to trial, nobody's going to change those conditions for that child. So that is one of the templates that they've used. It's like, how do we use temporary orders in a case to bias the outcome, right? And how do we use temporary orders to move the case into areas where we have judicial discretion outside of statutory law? So there's like a million tricks that have been used to do this. Do I think that rules can be created to stop this? No, I do not. I don't really believe in a kind of deontological ethics. I don't think you can reduce ethics or morals to rules. What we should rely upon are the customs of our people. And one of the customs of Americans is we do not obey illegal orders and mandates from the government. That's a long American tradition. And that's
civil disobedience. Henry David Thoreau wrote an essay on civil disobedience.
That's right. Yeah. So when I was put under an illegal gag order by Judge Bloody Mary Brown, which gave me a lifetime ban from doing any podcast interviews, writing newspaper articles, writing blog posts. I mean, it had a long list of things that I had a lifetime ban on. And I've had lawyers say that didn't happen. I show them the order and they just fall out of their chair. They can't believe it. Because Texas actually has better free speech protections than the federal government. In Texas, it's not legal to ever do prior restraints of speech. There's literally no legal reason in Texas to do a prior restraint on speech. You can be prosecuted afterwards if you advocate for the commission of a crime or you do a riot or whatever, but they can't restrain you. Even if you say, I'm going to go out there and provoke a riot, they can't stop you in Texas. Oh. So we have the best free speech protections probably in the world in the state of Texas. So they couldn't believe this. So I would go into court. I did 3 times. I went into Bloody Mary Brown's court and said, hey, look, here's the deal. And I filed briefs on this. I said, hey, I have maximum contempt for the court for issuing an order against the Texas Constitution like this. I have maximum contempt for you as a judge for being willing to pervert the law this way. And I have maximum contempt of the text of the order to the point where I will never obey it. And I'm telling you in writing, in a sworn motion, I will never obey under any conditions your illegal gag order. You're obligated to put me into the Lewis Sterrett County Jail for 18 months because that's the maximum you could put me in for criminal contempt. And I had a writ of habeas corpus ready, and we would go up into the criminal court system on habeas corpus where I would undoubtedly win and overturn the gag order and create a permanent precedent against these gag orders. So instead of putting me in jail, which she refused to do, I kept asking her, she wouldn't do it. I would literally show up to court with a jail bag and she would not throw me in jail. And the bailiffs thought it was hilarious. They were just laughing their ass off, about it. But here's her strategy, and this will show you again how these templates work. So here's how she reasoned. This is how I got put on supervised visitation. She said, well, I issued an illegal gag order against Jeff Younger. And I entered that order in the best interest of his child. So I entered an illegal gag order in the best interest of Mr. Younger's child. Mr. Younger is refusing to follow the illegal gag order. Therefore, Mr. Younger is not acting in the interest of his child. Therefore, I'm putting Mr. Younger on supervised visitation. That's literally the reasoning that she put in her order. And so you see what I mean, how they can construe the meanings of words simply because the order was said to be in the best interest of my child was enough to get me on supervised visitation. That's how they play it.
Yeah, we'll have to devote another show sometime to what supervised visitation is for people that don't know, but it's
I
pretty
refuse
awful.
to do it, by the way. I don't think any father should ever do it.
Good for you. Good for you. I agree.
Yes.
It's just a mechanism. It's just a mechanism. It's for a psychologist with infinitely malleable evidence to construct a case against you with the judge. That's all supervised visitation is.
Do you think that this case reveals something bigger than transgender medicine, namely how our society now understands fatherhood itself?
I think my case shows the outer limits of what family courts are capable of doing to fathers and what they're capable of doing to children. And I think that the scary thing about my case is that I think it's instructive for other judges to see just how far they can go. Because really what happens is they'll do these cases and then they see what happens. Is there any public outcry? Will the public accept this stuff? And you have to say that by and large in Texas, the political establishment accepted the rulings of these judges. Now, I finally did get rid of this judge. That just happened this year. She had to resign. But look, what are we at? We're at 14 years, you know?
But your willingness to push the limits of this, I think, is very admirable. I mean, you've taken a horrifying case, and you've used it. I said a virtue of necessity. I mean, you've used it as leverage to push the system as far as it'll go.
Yeah.
And so I hope people will pay attention to what you just said a moment ago about how you have managed to intimidate the judges. You have managed to show how far they can go, and so far how far beyond which they can't go. And I think everybody should be paying attention to that, and trying to do likewise, and to see how far to push the judge to the limit. Yeah, like you say, a few nights of even a few weeks in jail, there are worse things.
Whatever.
Losing your children, for example.
If you can't see kids, you might as well go into jail and learn how to fight, get in shape, and you're going to come out even better than you went in. I mean, I just don't think we've got this weird thing. Like, I'll tell you what, in California, the judge in California was asked to put me in jail no less than 7 times in a 5-day trial. I had to defend against criminal sanctions 7 times in a 5-day trial. And each time he basically told opposing counsel, no, I'm not going there. No, I'm not going there. And on the 7th time, he said, look, we can't put this guy in jail because it will cause a massive public outcry. He just straight up said that.
That's important. It's very important.
And I had told the judge, I said, look, this is going to be like Star Wars. You're going to put me in the LA County jail. And that's Darth Vader cutting down Obi-Wan Kenobi. And I'm going to rise more powerful than you could possibly imagine, because it will create a 10 million person movement in the United States, and they recognize that. They totally get that. Right?
Absolutely.
The one thing I have found that fathers, I think you're onto something about don't be whiny. A lot of fathers, they want to just recount all the terrible things that happened to them, and it comes across as whining, right? To me, I've really soundbited all that. I want to talk about what happened to me because I want you to see how far the courts will go to hurt kids. But then after that, all I want to talk about is what we're going to do about it. And the other thing is, I don't think people are realistic about how politics works. Like, it took me 6 years and about $90,000 to get a law passed against castrating kids in Texas, where it should have been easy.
Yeah.
Why is that? It's because what you're actually fighting is the donor class. You're not fighting the politicians. The politicians are irrelevant.
But anybody who would, Anyway, let me ask it this way. I want to ask you about one thing. I noticed that Tucker Carlson interviewed you. It was a short interview. It was about
Yes.
10 minutes. And of course, Tucker Carlson is always posing as, a nice man who cares about bread and butter, freedom of speech, the First Amendment, basic human decency. And I think he does in many ways. And I think he really cares about the fatherhood issues. We've taken him to task over a recent film he did repeatedly, which I think was pretty awful. But how did you feel about that interview? Two things struck me. One, that he did it, which I guess showed a certain amount of kudos. But secondly, that it was very brief.
Yeah, and he didn't ask me many questions, if you notice. He basically just sort of told me the direction to go. And it's almost like, when I talked to his producer at that time, their concern was that people wouldn't actually believe that this was happening. Their concern was that people would go, there's no way a Texas judge would do this. This is ridiculous. And they wanted me to really focus on the facts of what actually happened. And I think that was their goal there. And I got to tell you, when I went to pass this law in Texas, I would literally go into senator's office in Austin, and they would call me straight to my face. They would say, "You are a goddamn liar. Texas is not doing that to kids." And I had a whole way of dealing with this. It's a 4-week communication plan that I devised to slowly seed them and their staff with information, slowly to the point where they would actually read the court document. And then I had lined up people from the House, the Texas House, who would then talk to them after 4 weeks, and then they would come around. But my main issue for the first 4 years was that nobody in Austin believed it was actually happening. And our enemies were capitalizing on that. They were saying it's not happening. This is all made up. These are crazy fathers. It's the same thing they do with, well, they took my kids unjustly. These are crazy fathers. This doesn't happen. Our judges don't do that, right? This is the same thing we always face. So I think what Tucker Carlson was trying to do was to just lay out a very flat, fact-based sort of presentation that people could simply just go verify on YouTube. And I got a tremendous amount of people asking for court documents after that interview. And so I had a whole press package that I would just send them the court, and they could read it themselves. And I even had hyperlinks where you could go to the Dallas County website and verify that the docs I sent were correct. But people really at that time didn't believe it was happening.
Sorry. Did anything come of it? Did any of them follow it up? Did any of them?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, that's ultimately how I got the bill passed in Texas. Was some prominent people, Tan Parker, who's a senator here in Texas, Senator Hughes, just literally stood up in the Senate and said, "Okay, I've read the documents. I'm an attorney. This is actually happening." But that took them 6 years, and the reason it took 6 years is the donor class, the people that are giving them the money to get reelected, are all on the pro-trans side. So all the Republican donors are pro-trans. I mean, come on, you can't think it's an accident. I've been to Mar-a-Lago twice, okay? Every time I've been both times, Lady Maga's been there, who's a cross-dresser. It's a man in a dress. Every Republican National Committee that you see watch on YouTube live streamed, they always put a cross-dressing man up on the stage. Why is that? It's because they're hardcore believers in feminist and transgender ideologies. And so the fundamental problem with Republican politics, if you want to get down to practical stuff you can do, because I'm all about being practical. Here's the fundamental issue. You have a far-right voting base, and you have a far-left donor class. So if you're an elected official, how do you deal with this problem? Well, abortion would be a good example in Texas, because a lot of people think we outlawed abortion in Texas. We didn't pass a law outlawing the procedure, the medical procedure. So they come to this conservative voting base, and they say, "Look how conservative we are. We outlawed abortion in Texas." Then they go to their liberal donor class and they say, hey, listen, we are not prosecuting mothers if they kill their children. We only outlawed the procedure if doctors do it. And now almost all abortions are chemical abortions. So Planned Parenthood just gives them the pills, then the mothers administer the pills to themselves. And now Planned Parenthood doesn't have to have an emergency clinic and surgery clinic. So they're making even more money than they were before. So you can still give me the $5 million that I need to be elected. This is the game that's been played by Republican politicians since the 60s. They pass bills with loopholes, and then they tell conservatives that these are conservative bills. And then they go back to the donor class and they say, I put those loopholes in there for you. So don't worry about it. You can still give me money. And Republicans have just been falling for this forever. Like, for example, even with my bill that I passed here, they took out 3 sentences from the bill that I wrote, which would have classified these procedures as felony child sexual abuse, which in Texas is a life prison term, by the way. It's a life prison term. We just recently made it eligible for the death offense. Okay. So that would have completely eliminated it. You can't like go to Thailand where it's legal to abuse children, sexually abuse your children, and then come back to America. When you fly back into Texas, the police are just going to arrest you and we're going to put you in prison for the rest of your life. That's how it is. So they took those 3 sentences out for the donors. So then all of these gender clinics in Colorado and California began advertising in Texas saying, look, we'll give you first-class airfare. You can fly up to Colorado, castrate your kid, and we'll fly you back. Whereas if we had made it felony child sexual abuse, you couldn't leave the state with the intention of sexually abusing your kid. That's illegal. See what I mean? They put loopholes in these bills. So our guys have been not very sophisticated in the way to deal with elected officials. What you're actually dealing with a politician is a proxy for the donor class. So one of the ways I got the bill passed in Texas, like I had a guy in a House committee, a Republican that just was not going to vote to get it out of committee and give it a vote on the floor of the House. I found his largest in-state donor, which was a banker. And I went to his bank. I set up an appointment on false pretenses for getting a loan, a farm loan. And I surrounded his bank with protesters. And it was people handing out flyers that had a picture of the banker on it, his face, on a rancher who was castrating a bull. And it had the face of the banker superimposed on it. It said, this is what this banker does to children. He supports transgenderism. And then it had all of these banks, local banks in the county where you could move your money to that didn't support transgender. And so on the sidewalk at every entrance to this bank, I had people there handing out these flyers. And I told them to look out the window. And I said, I already have an option for the billboard across from your bank. I'm going to put your face up there too. And the next day, my bill made it out of committee and got a vote. You see, like they're all politicians are is a proxy for the moneyed oligarchy that actually runs these things. I was in a meeting of big donors in Dallas, big, huge executives. Like these are like guys that are optioned. Their salaries are in the millions. They're working for some of the largest companies in America. And I had a guy walk up to me and he said, has the governor of Texas helped you with this issue at all? And I said, man, I can't get anybody to help me. I certainly have not heard from the governor. He whipped out his cell phone and called the governor. And this is a slight paraphrase because I don't remember his exact words, but he said, you either do something for this man or I'm going to pull $300 million out of your next run for governor. And the next day, an entire web page was taken down from Texas Health and Human Services that was promoting transgenderism. And he made statements on Twitter, against what was happening to my son. Like this is if you want to do effective politics, that's what you have to deal with. So I tell a lot of guys like, okay, you can do political activism with elected officials, but you're just dealing with proxies. If you really want long-term change, what you need to do is become a billionaire. And if you can't become a billionaire, you need to pool all your money together. And we all need to become a $1 billion consortium. And then we need to create our own super PAC. And then we need to be able to do what was done to Thomas Massey to every anti-father politician in the States. And that would be effective. But traditional lobbying, traditional electoral politics, precinct level politics, extensive appeals in the federal courts. These things have to be done. I'm not against them, but they're necessary, but they're not sufficient.
Yeah, yeah. No, I follow foreign affairs on some issues like this, and we find the same thing there. It's exactly the same. It's the donor class. The politicians are just front men, and the donor class is calling the shots.
That's correct. And once you understand that, okay, now I know how to play this game, right? Yeah. Like I found out this banker, rich people are different than people like me. Like, I come from a fairly poor background. I'll be fine just sleeping on the ground. Actually, I don't really give a shit. But these guys, like, image is very important to them. Reputation is very important to them. In a number of cases, I won't tell you who, but senior officials in Texas, I went to the churches where their children went to church. And that made a huge difference because they really care about the perception of their family members. These are not the traditional way you think about political organizing. If you can get, a governor's daughter to tell him what she thinks about transing little boys, you could achieve things that you could never do with 12 years of traditional lobbying.
Yes.
Adley, do you have something to?
No,
I'm sorry. I've been kind of monopolizing now.
No, it's okay. I'm just taking in what you've been saying, and you've been revealing a lot. And also, I have not contributed as much as I usually do because I'm floored by much of what you're saying, and I'm highly impressed by what you do.
Yeah, well, it's here, don't give me too much credit. Like, when they try to kill your son, you will kind of rise to the damn occasion. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm a Texan. We don't do the thing where you make a virtue of necessity. We don't like that. I'm doing what my sons deserve. They will get everything that I have to protect them, and they deserve that. That's a duty that I have. I don't really deserve any special, kudos for that. Maybe just because I say things so plainly, and I'm willing to say things plainly. Maybe because I've, lifted up that rock, of American politics and seen all the creepy crawlies that actually make things work underneath it. A lot of people just put the rock back. Well, I started smashing bugs instead. You can do things, but I think the ideology, if there's any contribution I've made, it's that the conservative ideology of constitutionalism can get in the way of you seeing how power is actually exercised now that we're in a post-constitutional era. If we are going to have constitutional rule, we will have to reestablish it because it's gone now. So power is actually exercised through large moneyed elites. If fathers, for example, would come together and create a super PAC with the size of CPAC, which wouldn't be that hard, they could exert political power which would dwarf what the feminist organizations can do. I've done the math in Texas. I don't know what it is in other states, but if around 15% of fathers stop paying child support because they can't see their kids, the whole system would collapse here. They could bring the system to collapse. What a price to pay. I mean, you do 18 months in a county jail to collapse the whole system. That's a bargain to me. These are things that are effective. These are things that would be effective. It turns out to be very hard to get people to do things that would be effective. And there's a lot of reasons for it. I'll give you an example. Texas, I know Texas, South Carolina, Alabama, Kentucky very well. Our number one opponent, you would think, would be feminists in the Democratic Party. But our number one opponents are conservative women feminists. Conservative women are our number one opponents. We just had a famous speech on the floor of the Texas Republican Convention where this woman just flat out says children should be raised by their mothers, fathers are all deadbeats. And she's speaking for the great majority of Republican women. That's why we don't have 50-50 custody in Texas. And it's probably why we won't get it for a long time.
Yes,
Yeah,
Stephen.
I
Stephen,
can believe that.
Steve and I made an episode about conservatism, why conservatives are always losing. And also, Stephen has written a number of articles about conservatives, and some of other people, outspoken people, have spoken about the failure of conservatives. And I once said that conservatives are like people who take a knife to a gunfight. They simply really do not know who they're up against. And that actually leads me to another question, if we could just rewind for one moment before we end this episode, is that you mentioned dealing with radical ideologists, and this deals with feminists also because that's what they are. So I believe that some men, I don't know if it's because they want to be willingly ignorant, or they just don't want to deal with facing reality. For example, many men will say something like, "Oh, leftists, oh, feminists, they're dumb. They don't know what they're doing. It's just a bunch of wackos that we just have to ignore, and it'll all just be, it'll all just pass over." And a lot of men, I'm not saying I'm this big tough guy, they simply don't know how to face reality. When someone tells you something, a lot of the time they do mean it. I mean, even if you could see this even on the street sometimes, where maybe this is a good comparison where I have fairly good intuition. When someone starts an odd conversation with someone and it doesn't end in a conversation, it actually ends in violent assault, but the conversation seems harmless. And being that I'm from New York City and I've met all kinds of people and been in all kinds of neighborhoods, my statement again is, no, the person's not joking. They're not just talking. They mean that. So why are men, if you have any input on this, why are they constantly underestimating radical ideologists as if they're just playing one big joke? And throughout, I don't, ever since the French Revolution, the leftists have been showing us that they're not joking around.
So there's a long answer to that. I rely for a lot of my ideas on this, a guy named Truman, who wrote a book called The Rise and Triumph of the Expressive Self, in which it's an intellectual history where he sort of chronicles a new anthropology emerges in the 20th century, where people actually begin to think of human beings as something different than what human beings were at the beginning of the 20th century. So by the time you get to the 1970s, what people think of as human, the essence of being a human, is different than what people thought in the early 1900s. And, I can remember this with like my great grandfather. If you ask my great grandfather, this is a guy that cut hay with a scythe until the day he died. He was in shape. He could outwork all of us. Literally, until he had a heart attack, he could outwork every single one of us. I'm not like saying that like out of some kind of like, admiration for him. It was just an absolute fact. The guy could cut hay all day long. He could cut 4 acres of hay before you could blink. It was incredible. If you would have asked him, hey, are you fulfilled by being a farmer? Do you feel like, you're achieving your life's purpose by growing food? You would have probably spent 8 hours trying to get him to understand this question, because for him, working as a farmer was not in the category of self-actualization. It was something he did to improve his family. It was something that he did to simply fulfill a duty that he had for other things. Like his soul was not tied up into cutting hay. You know what I'm saying? The notion that he had of what it meant to be a man is very different than what I grew up into in the 70s and 80s. And so I really responded well to Truman's book because I had seen that in my own family. Like talking to my great grandfather, I remember it was just a disconnect there, but between, and he was right. He was right, and I wasn't right. And I've now eventually come around to his point of view, which is, I was just joking the other day to a liberal lady. She said, "Are you a conservative?" And I said, "Well, I don't know." I said, "If I met Attila the Hun, he'd be a little liberal for me, but we could probably work together. Am I still conservative at that point?" I'm probably much far to the right, actually, because I agree with my great grandfather now. And it's not because of policy issues. It's because I've come to believe that the kind of ideas that he had about what it was to be a person was the right way, and the way that I had been educated was incorrect. And so I think a lot of men have imbibed liberal modernism in the assumptions they make about what it means to be a person. You know, like what is this fear of going to jail for a good cause? Well, that all has to do with these ideas of self-actualization, not being under the control of others, a notion of freedom that is expressive, because you don't have expressive freedom in prison, right? But there's another notion of freedom, which has to do with duties and morality, that will require you to go to prison. The only form of freedom that you can exercise in some cases is to go to prison. So there's a completely different way of thinking about it. So if we get down to the root, I think that a lot of modern people have imbibed extreme forms of liberal modernism. And you see it when they talk about rights. Like if you look at early medieval and ancient notions of rights, they're never separated from the concept of duty. In fact, rights were just the flip side of a duty. You had duties to perform, and you needed rights concomitant with those duties to be able to perform the duties, right? So there was no notion of a floating abstraction of a right. All rights came with duties, and all duties had to come with rights. In fact, it was an absolute defense at law in Roman law, that if you could show that you could not perform your duties as a citizen because you didn't have the legal freedom to do so, it's an absolute defense. Not so in our modern system. In our modern system, you have rights to free speech, but you have no duties that go along with it. You have rights to possess property, but you have no duties that go along with that. So there's, in a lot of modern men's minds, I believe, this notion of rights and duties have been separated, and they don't like to talk about the duty side. They don't even think much about the duty side. You know, do you see how like I don't really like praising me makes me uncomfortable, because what you're saying is I deserve praise for fulfilling my duties as a father? I'm not comfortable. I'm actually not comfortable with that, right? But if I had just a rights-based idea, I have a rights to my children, right? I might be accepting of that kind of praise. You see? So there's so you can see that like separating rights and duties actually changes your temperament about what you're willing to be praised for, what you think is praiseworthy, what ends seem to be magnanimous ends that you would want to achieve. So I think what is necessary, and this is very, I feel like I could be in an Aristophanes play in the clouds, like I'm talking about all this highfalutin philosophy crap. But, like what we need is some way to regenerate, especially in young men, the notion of duty as concomitant with rights. And with my sons, I'll give you a great example. The custody evaluators, they always try to pin on men this idea that they're authoritarian parents. That's one of the win buttons you can get in court, right? Mm-hmm. So they tried to do this with my sons all the time. And one time I was in the room and Blake Mitchell asked my son, James, well, does your dad have lots of rules? He didn't say, does he have rules? He says, does he have lots of rules and tell you what to do? And James said, well, my dad says we don't have to have rules. And Blake Mitchell just shook his head like, what the hell? And so then he kind of went in for the over-permissive parenting trap, right? And he said, well, then, how do you know what the rules of the house are, what you can do in the house? He said, well, my dad says that we should treat people respectfully and that we should just be reasonable with people. He says my room doesn't have to be perfectly clean. It should just never rise to anybody's attention. And he was literally quoted me when he said that. And he said, well, did you have any rules? He said, yeah, my dad had to make one rule because we kept stepping on our iPads and breaking the glass. So now we have a rule. iPads have to always be on tables. But we've been able to avoid having to make any rules because we stay reasonable. And he said, well, what happens if, you break a glass or something? And he says, well, my dad has the no mistakes principle. If you can fix it, it's not a mistake. And so he asked me in detail. He spent hours with me on this, because this is like very foreign to the modern liberal male mindset. You know, your duties have to do with the respect and dignity of others, not rules. It can't be reduced to rules. And I want my kids to be risk takers. So if they make a mistake and break something or whatever, if they can fix it, it's not a mistake. You take all the risk you want. As long as you can fix it, take the risk, you know? And so they were never able to get me on that. But that never appears in his report. And I could tell in this 4-hour conversation I had with him, which I had to pay $4,000 for, by the way. He charged me $60,000 and then an additional 20. I wound up paying $80,000 for this custody evaluation. He really was trying to get his head around, basically, if I had to summarize it, what is my anthropology of a human being? Like, what I was very clear. I thought my boys were something different than what he thought they were as people. You know, I was raising my sons to realize they have duties to the people around them. And that by reasonably fulfilling those duties, you don't have to be perfect, but by reasonably fulfilling those duties, they would get respect from people. And
Jeff, I'll have to talk to you sometime about my arguments about the English Puritans, the American Puritans, because I think they're the ones that really founded America, not the so-called founding fathers.
I agree with that 100%.
And they were the ones that imparted our Christian faith, and they were the ones who were obsessed with duties, and they said almost nothing about rights.
Yeah, we're too obsessed with rights. But man, that is a hard thing to tell a father who's come out of family court, that the issue here is not what your rights are. The issue is what is your duty going forward.
Yeah.
That's a hard thing for men who have been raised in an expressive individualist culture to hear. What they struggle with is they don't realize how liberating it actually is to recognize what your duties are. It's so immensely simplifying to your life. It is so much easier to conduct yourself in an ethical way, because you don't go around asserting rights in inappropriate ways. Everything becomes appropriate and in its right place. And even the California Judge Uhas in California, he said, man, you have come into my courtroom and you have conducted yourself better than anybody that has ever been in my courtroom. And I said, that's because I have duties to the court that I'm not going to abrogate, no matter how much I disagree with the things you're doing. And I think that's the real reason I didn't go to jail in that court.
This is, of course, our Christian faith, of course. I mean, the source of this is Christian faith again.
Yeah, 100%.
Jeff, I want to thank you for this. Has been a very rich discussion. I mean, this has been incredible. And so we don't forget, I want people to, see more of your videos and work and your contributions and so forth. Where can people find your work? You can find everything. Just go to jeffyounger.show. jeffyounger.show. And it's a joke. Like, I don't actually have a show, but I felt like my life had become so public. It was like the Truman Show. So I used to say, I'm in the Jeff Younger Show. And then it kind of stuck. And then somebody gifted me this domain. And so I just kept it. And it'll link off to my Substack and my YouTube and all that. Just remember that my YouTube videos are for my sons. I can't communicate with my sons. But they're old enough to get on the internet now. So this is just me imparting what my ancestors gave to me, and I'm giving it to my sons. A lot of people have said they get some good stuff out of them. I mean, it's practical things. It's like, you're a young man. How do you get the respect of older men? If you're in a situation where you have to make some risky planning, how should you deal with risks like that? How should you think about what it means to be wealthy? It's like really practical questions like that for my sons. So just keep in mind, there's not a lot of philosophy there. I guess it's applied philosophy. But, it's like, if you're a young guy, you need to know that old people are different. Old people see risk differently. Old people live mainly through their memories rather than through dreams of future accomplishments. So you have to appeal to them in different ways, the rhetoric that you use and so forth. It's like very practical stuff like that. Well, you and your sons need to know that they have a father, and it sounds like that's what you're giving them.
That's what I'm trying to
So,
do.
Jeff, God bless you.
Thank you.
God bless your efforts, and God bless your sons as well. And may you all succeed in this endeavor and prosper. And I hope you get more attention to this.
Thank you. And I want to thank both of you for all your work. Uh, Dr. Baskerville, I've read all your books and I promote them all the time. They're all over my Substack. So I try not to go overboard with it, but I think everybody should read your books.
I've noticed. Thank you very much. I'm very grateful for that. You said some nice things.
Yes, thank you for being with us today. And also like and subscribe to the channel if you want to get more commentary about men's issues and men's well-being. And Jeff, I will include in the description a link to your website and your X page. So again, have a great day and thank you for being with us.
Take care.
Take care.